start at the beginning then. Tell me a little bit about your where you were born and brought up, and what you know about your parents or even grandparents.
Well, I was born in St John's Wood, and of course brought up there for the first 20 odd years of my life. My mother, originally one of her sisters, and her father all lived in the same road, Hamilton Terrace, and her other sister didn't live very far away. They were a very close-knit family. Father's family was not as close-knit. Now, between me, my grandfather's house, was Dr. Hertz, the chief rabbi.
Yes, that's fair, Hamilton.
Grandfather was a vice president of the United Synagogue, and very friendly with Dr. Hertz. So I knew Dr. Hertz and his family, of course. And he, in fact, preached to me at my bar mitzvah.
That's something, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I have very nice memories of him as a very nice man. I wouldn't know anything about the religious side. And I was brought up in the St John's Wood Synagogue, the Orthodox one.
In Abbey Road?
In Abbey Road.
Yeah.
Grandfather was head warden for many years. And curiously enough, because grandfather was in the box, I was looked after by another gentleman, who turns out to have been the uncle of one of the members of my Jack's group with whom I'm quite closely concerned.
That's interesting, yeah.
So,
did you go regularly to synagogue?
oh yes, as a small boy I used to go every Saturday. The routine was that if I went to synagogue in the morning, I was allowed to go either to Lord's or a football match with my father in the afternoon.
Fair
My
enough,
family were
wasn't it?
not
Yeah.
that rigid.
No.
So, and curiously enough, my mother's youngest sister was a member of the Liberal in St John's Wood.
Oh, that's interesting. So what made her break away, I wonder?
I don't know. Long before my time, she must have been a very early member of the Liberal.
Yes. Did your parents show any interest in that, or did they look askance a little bit?
Oh no. In fact, we all joined the Liberal together after the war. My father was honorary secretary of the War Services Committee, who supplied the chaplains to the forces. And he became very friendly and a great admirer of Rabbi Edgar.
So what year did your family join the Liberal Synagogue?
1946.
Yeah.
And I was married there the same year by Rabbi Edgar.
Yeah. Can we go back a bit and ask you a bit about your schooling and the sort of home life that you had?
Oh yes, well of course the home life was very tied up with the Tuck family, my grandfather, who lived along the road. And he used to have a family gathering every Friday evening and every Sunday evening. And of course on all the high holy days.
And you all went both on the Friday and the Sunday?
All the family went Friday and Sunday. It was very difficult to get a dispensation.
What about the in-laws to the family? That must have been quite hard.
Well, one or two of them were notoriously grumpy.
Yes.
And the millionaire one was a bit rebellious, but
Yeah.
he still came. He didn't go so much on the Sunday evening, I think.
Oh, was it a social evening?
Friday evening, yes, we had 5 minutes prayers while the grumpy uncle read the Jewish Chronicle.
Yes.
And Sunday evening they played bridge and discussed the stock market, as far as I can make out.
And for the younger members of the family?
There was very little entertainment at all. We escaped as soon as we could.
Yes.
And of course when I was younger and grandfather was a widower, we used to go to lunch or tea on a Saturday as well.
People were much more dutiful and family orientated in those days, weren't they?
Oh yes. And grandfather was a widower for a long time, and his daughters used to keep a close eye on him. Afraid mine do on me too.
And what was his business? Tell us about his...
He was one of the sons of Reverend Tuck and Sons, who were fine art publishers, producing Christmas cards, calendars, and what have you. And no doubt you've heard from other people they were one of the great Jewish employers, not working on a Saturday, but of course they had to work Sundays instead.
They still did Christmas cards?
Oh yes, Christmas cards and calendars. They made, as I understand it, and I have no personal knowledge of this, They had a well-established business in Hamburg, I think, before they came to this country. My grandfather was the youngest brother, and he was born in 1860. The very successful part of the business was they were the people who were instrumental, or one of them at Oldtuck, in introducing the picture postcard around about the turn of the century.
That's interesting.
Before then, the post office wouldn't carry a thing with a picture on one side and a message on the other. And they got the law changed to enable that to be done.
Was your father in that business?
No, my father was a barrister. My father's family were in furniture. We traced the firm back to 1846 and had a centenary celebration, in fact, in 1948 when I was with the firm. And my great-grandfather started, presumably pushing stuff around on the barrow, as they all did. And they built the business up towards the latter part of the last century, largely with export. They sold things like silver beds to Egypt and so on. And they had lovely business. Latterly, only making the finest of the fine themselves and buying everything else from other people. They had 3 or 4 acres of showroom.
That's a lot, isn't it?
It
Where
was
was that?
enormous. Curtin Road, corner of Worship Street.
Down in the East End?
Not quite, back of Broad Street Station.
Yes.
East End, yes, but only just, almost in the city.
So they must have owned a large property.
Oh yes, there was quite a big factory there, or factory site, a large part of which was used as showrooms. At one time, my younger daughter, incidentally, who works for the Draper's Record, who are running a centenary celebration this year, has just found for me a B. Cohen advert of 1887
Oh, that's interesting.
from the Draper's Record.
That's interesting. Did you didn't consider taking up law like your father?
Oh yes, I would have done, but of course, like everybody else, I went into the army. I actually joined up in 1939, but they didn't want anybody of my age then, and I wasn't called up until I was just under 20 in the summer of 1940. In fact, the air raids on London began about 2 days after I was called up, and I watched it all from Mill Hill, where I was trained at Mill Hill Barracks.
Yes, yes.
And I did my 6 years in the army.
In this country, or were you?
No, I was just one of the lucky ones, really. We sailed to North Africa on the day that the fighting finished in North Africa. I got as far as the beaches outside Tunis, waiting to sail to go to Sicily, and got jaundice and went back to Algiers. And didn't go to Sicily till the fighting was finished there. And then I drove up all the way up the toe of Italy. There was no road for a lot of it, but there's now a motorway. We drove across the Straits of Messina, right up to Taranto, across to Bari, and saw a little bit of action. And then they decided that they had enough people fighting, they didn't want me to fight, so I was put more or less in the training part of the thing. And eventually I landed up in General Headquarters at Caserta. I had one of those army freaks where they asked me what I wanted to do. I said I'd like to work in an office on the legal side. 2 days later I was in an office on the legal side.
That's amazing.
And spent the last 2 years of the war there. I finished up actually, specialising on war crimes. And I was what they call a Deputy Assistant Adjutant General. Very interesting job.
Then you came, and then you went from there back into the...
I went from there back into B. Cohen and Sons as office boy.
Yes.
And got rid of my major's crown and everything else.
Yes, yes.
And got married too.
And then where did you go live when you got married?
Northwood.
You came straight to Northwood?
Yes, Jean, my wife, got on the train. The first day she went to Wembley and didn't like it. The next day she went to Northwood Hills and found a house she liked. We bought it.
Did your family think that you'd moved out to the country, practically?
No, no. You see, family originally played golf at Edgware.
Ah, I see.
Now, the Edgware golf course, as you know, is centred around was centred around Cannons Park, and the bit, I suppose is it to the north of it, where Stanmore Station is now. The railway to Stanmore was cut right through the middle of the Edgware golf course.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that piece along the side of the London Road.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And eventually, they sold the whole thing for building.
Mm.
Well, family had to find somewhere else to play. And it was nice and convenient to travel from Baker Street.
To Northwood Hill.
So, they joined Sandy Lodge. My mother and father never had a car. And they joined Sandy Lodge many years before. There weren't many Jewish members. It was run by a man called Marx, who I think was Jewish but was violently anti-Semitic.
Was this the golf course that caused the trouble? Is that the
No,
one?
No, this is Sandy Lodge, the other one, which has never caused any trouble.
No.
And they joined Sandy Lodge just before Edgware started to fold up. And they knew Sandy Lodge. I mean, they must have joined there 36 or something like that. And they did know a little of the Northwood area because they were used to going to Sandy Lodge on the train.
Yes.
And certainly I used to play golf from there, but I didn't know Northwood itself. But it was a nice, easy place to travel to Liverpool Street.
Was there were there any Jewish people out here at that time, do you know?
6 families, I think.
Yes.
Louis Levy was here, of course.
Yes.
And the Espiers.
Yes.
And what's the name of the man? Jeffries. Mr. Jeffries lived in Moor Park. You know the famous story about Mr. Jeffries. You know there's some houses in Moor Park which back onto the golf course. In the old days that carried automatic membership of the Moor Park Club.
Yeah.
Now Mr. Jeffries, who didn't look or sound Jewish, had one of these houses. And without asking, was elected a member of the Moor Park Club.
That's nice to it.
And was thoroughly thrilled about it.
Yes.
So, yes, there were a few Jewish families.
Of course, I think I'm right in saying in about that time, the Pinner Orthodox Synagogue was meeting in the little chapel, weren't they, down in
I
Pinner?
presume so. I don't know much about the Pinner Orthodox Synagogue. Of course, Santa Grown Bertram Jacobs was roughly a local group of the LJS.
What they called the area group in those days.
Well, that
it
came a lot later, as you know, because you were one of the
I
early
was,
members.
yes, later than 46, of course, about 10 years later. But,
Yes, that's right. And that was more Peggy Lang and her efforts.
And Michael Bucks, was he out? Did you know him in those early days?
I didn't know Michael Bucks. In fact, I really didn't know Michael Bucks until I got involved with the World Union.
Oh, I see. Well, we'll come to that. So we'll go back again to, so you and Jean settled in Northwood and you did the journey. And then you had family. So.
Yes. I had
What did you?
2 girls and a boy. And the girls went to Northwood College, which they hated thoroughly. My son went to Terry's Northwood Preparatory School. And I'd promised my mother, who was dead by then, that I'd send him to my old school, Wellington, which I did, and which he was thoroughly miserable at.
I did.
Much happier at Merchant Taylors locally, where all his friends went.
Yes.
But
did they have any Jewish education, your children, at that stage?
not really, not the older 2, until it came roughly to confirmation age, when they did correspondence classes with the LJS. And both the older 2 were confirmed. My eldest by Stone.
Oh, yeah.
And I think John Rayner was back by the time my son was confirmed.
Yes. And then Diana was
young enough to be involved with the Northwood crowd. And she started by going to Wembley with the Zelentas and the Aikmans.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Only Timmy Aikman was hardly old enough.
David was more perhaps Diana's age.
Yes, it was David and just about Timmy and the 2 Zelenta boys.
Yes. And they didn't like to go, I remember very clearly. The boys.
They were no more keen than my daughter,
No.
who boasts that she spent 8 years in religion school not learning a thing.
Right, so, Dick, I know that your wife was a very sick lady from when I first met you. When did she become ill?
Well, she had been diagnosed as having multiple sclerosis before I married her.
Mm.
And in fact, she pretty well recovered from the initial attack. And our old GP wouldn't even believe she had the disease.
Mm.
And for 10 years she was quite all right.
Yeah, so she brought the children up all right?
Yes, the
marriage.
elder two. Well, my mother-in-law lived with us.
Mm.
Incidentally, mother-in-law had been married at the LJS in 1917.
Who married her? Who performed that ceremony?
Well, I should imagine Dr. Mattock.
Yes.
She was married in Hill Street, but of course
Yes.
Mattock may have been in America. I don't honestly know.
No.
Because he did go during the First
Yes,
World War.
yes.
And Jean and her brother both attended the LJS classes.
What was Jean's maiden name?
Sheldon.
Sheldon, yes.
Father was an American.
Mm. So, then what happened after the sort of first 10 years? Did it begin to show itself?
Yes, and she gradually was started off. She couldn't walk. Lost the use of her legs, and it got to the stage where she needed a personal attendant, which was a very difficult thing to arrange even in the 1960s, as it then was.
Yes, I'm sure.
With 3 youngish children round the place.
Were you still in Northwood Hills at that stage?
No, I left Northwood Hills in 1951. We moved actually to Dean Road, Northwood, opposite where I live now.
Oh, yeah.
Where I lived for just on 10 years. And there was a very nice house, but inconvenient. It was full of steps, which were impossible for a wheelchair. So, after a lot of searching, I found a house that had a completely flat ground floor.
Where was that?
In Kilfrey Road, Northwood. And that we were able to put a lift in, and able to cope with to quite an extent. There was a spacious house and big enough for a wheelchair.
Did you ever have an area meeting at your house?
Oh, yes, lots and lots. We could get 50 people in our living room.
Well, I remember the very first time I got involved with Northwood, and I went to a house, and I never known to this day whether it was your house or whether it was Louis Levy's house, but I had a feeling it was yours, because I remember somebody saying that your wife hadn't been able to be there because she wasn't well. And this, I would have thought, was during the 1950s, when our children were very small.
I would have thought early 60s, but yes, we had a big room. I doubt if it was Louis Levy's house, because they didn't actually have a big room.
Then it was your house?
It was mine, I would think.
Could you explain, just for the benefits of anybody who will eventually be listening to this tape, what an area meeting was and what was the purpose
Well,
of it?
you really want to talk to Dolly Towle, who was the convener. The 2 conveners of the area group of the LJS for Northwood were Barbara Brandenberger and Dorothy Towle.
Oh, well, you tell us what you know.
And it started off, I have an idea it was Heinz Stern, who was instrumental in some way, but I don't know how. But anyhow, Peggy Lang, who was the social secretary, if you remember, of the synagogue, was deputed to organise area groups. In other words, members of the LJS who didn't come regularly to synagogue and would attend.
And lived a long way away, presumably.
Lived a good way away, yes. And we used to have meetings, 3 or 4 times a year, possibly more.
I know we had Hanukkah parties when the children were very small.
All sorts of things. Very nicely run by Dorothy and Barbara. And you know, we often had them. And it was usually either Michael Buck's house or mine, because we both had a large room.
Yes.
And very pleasant it used to be, too. One of the ministers would come. And the last one I remember we had, and I can't tell you whose house it was in, was when David Goldstein came.
Oh yes.
That after the Northwood Synagogue started, it just petered out.
Yes. Were you involved with Northwood right at the beginning?
No.
So what made you change from LJS and come to Northwood?
I didn't. I'm still a member of LJS,
Oh,
believe it or not.
Well, when did you come?
I looked it up,
Yes.
having the old books. I must have joined Northwood in 1965. I think probably because of Dinah, and I thought I might as well join Northwood. She was going to the classes with Northwood.
When it was in West Lodge School, was it, or?
Originally West Lodge School, yes. And
did you come to those services in Pinner Park?
yes, one or two, not very many.
Were you still doing the journey down to the city?
No, the city was disposed of. We couldn't get planning permission in 1950. It's just at the end of the terrific restrictions, and they wouldn't let us rebuild the factory, which incidentally was bombed in both wars, a very unique distinction, but very largely destroyed, and what was left could have been rebuilt beautifully, but they wouldn't give us permission. So the family took their money out and left me the business, which was very kind of them. And I moved out to Enfield, where I carried on the business for the next 18 years.
Up until when was that?
68, when my landlords decided that they wanted me out.
Yeah.
Only sort of a little bit of gentle pressure. I couldn't stay there. We were down a little back road.
Yes.
And my landlords were motor people. And by accident they used to leave vehicles in the little back road so that we couldn't get in or out. So I more or less had to give up, and I joined Associated Piano Company. I worked on and off for the, well, I say on and off, with their various vicissitudes for the next 7 years. Very interestingly too.
What were you doing there then?
Well, I started off by selling my own products and virtually had a little section in the factory making high-class furniture, which I sold. But they became so inefficient and were financially so rocky that they were eventually taken over about 4 times in 3 years. And the last one who took them over was one of the Slater Walker spin-off whiz kids, whom I worked for 3 or 4 years very amicably. He was very nice to me.
Yes.
And he finished off by buying a little furnishing business in York Street, West 1, and put me in to run it. It was great fun.
That was nice.
It was very nice, but somebody eventually out-whiz-kid him, and we were taken over in our turn. And I wasn't at all happy with the new lot. We were even more financially rocky. The whiz-kid, the first one, had turned us round. We were quite stable. The next lot were not. And I eventually took a little local job in Ruislip. He was very nice to me.
Yes.
And he finished off by buying a little furnishing business in York Street, West 1, and put me in to run it. It was great fun.
That was nice.
It was very nice, but somebody eventually out-whiz-kid him, and we were taken over in our turn. And I wasn't at all happy with the new lot. We were even more financially rocky. The whiz-kid, the first one, had turned us round. We were quite stable. The next lot were not. And I eventually took a little local job in Ruislip. Worked for 7 or 8 years in a kitchen shop in Ruislip.
What year did you lose your wife, Jean?
She actually died in 1970, but she was in hospital on and off from about 1962 onwards, and really wasn't at home for almost 10 years, not permanently.
So you had quite a few years on your own before you married Dulcie, didn't you?
Oh yes, over 10.
Yes, yes. And then, so then, after your children had left home, when did you leave your big house in Kivry Road?
Well, Judy got married in 1972, as you know, it's one of the early weddings in Northwood Synagogue. And my son set up a house on his own, having finished university, about the same time. And I wouldn't stay in that house just with one daughter.
Yeah.
So we moved back to Dean Road.
Opposite where you were?
Yes.
Oh,
I happened to know the house and know that it was unlikely that they would build at the back of
Yes.
it, so it was worth a chance.
I know at some point you presented the synagogue with the Ark and the reading desk, but I don't quite remember how that came about.
Well, they wanted an ark and a reading desk, and it was the sort of thing that my factory could make. And at the time we were not that busy. Normally we're not able to do anything like that, because the last person to get any preference from that sort of factory was me. And we always came last. It must have been about 1967 when we made and presented that. It should last for a long time if anybody wants to look after it.
That's beautiful. And what about, then you served on the council, didn't you?
Yes. I can't
in what
remember how.
capacity
Something to do with Margaret Halbooth.
Yes.
In
In what capacity? I know you were treasurer, weren't you?
yes, but I started out, and it must have been, I should think, 71, I should think. I'm very surprised. I was elected to the council with Margaret.
Yeah.
The third member of our group, I can't remember his name, he wasn't,
Yes.
but we were. And Michael Lever was then chairman.
Oh, yes.
Took one look at me and decided that, as I knew absolutely nothing about religion or education, I'd be put in charge of the religion school.
That's right, I remember that.
Which was great fun. I went with Andrew on his first trip to Israel.
Yes.
Quite fun. With Ruth Albert,
Oh,
my
yes.
companion.
Someone from the past.
Marvelous lady, yes. It was a lovely trip. Now, I enjoyed the religion school. I hope we put it on a more professional basis. I didn't know anything about the educational side, but I did know that children misbehave if they're bored.
That's right. That's right.
And
I
so
think we could be very proud now to have one of the best religion schools in the Union, I would imagine.
I hope so. I think it was by the time I moved on to be treasurer. And Charles was kind enough to ask me to be treasurer, much to my surprise. I'd only been 2 years on council.
Yeah.
And I had a very enjoyable time, thanks to Charles.
And you're still involved now, aren't you?
Trustee of the synagogue, but not
Yeah.
really involved. I reckon it ought to be left to the younger people to
Well,
work
I
out
always
the
see you
policy.
there on special occasions,
I'm-
capacity as...
I'm there, and
Steward.
I'm Shamus on a Saturday, but as far as making the policy or making a decision, thank you, no. That's the younger people's
Fair
job.
enough, fair enough. So, how did you come to meet Dulcie? I presume you knew her through the congregation?
Yes, I met her at a New Year's Eve party at Michael Lever's.
Yes. Michael Lever has a lot to be responsible for.
I'm afraid so, yes. Also, I was responsible for a certain amount for him.
Good. Tit for tat.
I was able to help him on one occasion, thank God. Yes, he used to have a New Year's Eve party for the synagogue at his house in Baines Lane. And I met Dulcie there. I suppose about 2 years before we got married. And whether it was Andrew or whether it was our children, we were pushed into it.
Good, good.
So that was that one. But in the meantime, I'd encountered Bertram.
Yes.
Now, one of my larger customers were Heels at Tottenham Court Road, who Bertram also supplied in a big way. And I used to meet him at their functions. They used to give parties every
Yes,
year.
yes.
For some reason, Bertram decided that I should do something on the World Union. As you know, that was very much his baby.
Certainly.
And he got me to join the Friends of Progressive Judaism in Europe. And within well, I suppose a couple of years, the organisation virtually collapsed.
Mm.
Somebody took on as chairman,
Mm.
and I was made treasurer, and the chairman just disappeared.
So you were left holding the baby.
I don't know whether it was John Rayner or whether it was Dove Marmor. I think it was Dove Marmor at that stage.
Yeah.
Who said, you better get on with it and pull it together and I'll give you a hand.
Mm. Mm.
And so I ran that for, I suppose, 7 or 8 years.
Mm.
Very nice. They found me some very nice people.
You had to travel quite a bit, didn't you, for conferences and things?
Oh yes, to Paris, Geneva, Amsterdam, and could have gone further, but I was still working and couldn't
Yes.
necessarily get the time off.
No.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. I met most of the establishment.
Yes.
I got more support from RSGB, I'm afraid, than I ever did from ULPS. And no doubt Geoffrey Davis will tell you that I had a good
Yes.
go at him. He was then chairman of ULPS.
Yes, yes.
It was very interesting and I enjoyed it. But only gave it up really when I remarried and hadn't the time. I was
Yes.
also working in Ruislip by then and doing
Yeah.
a lot of evening work.
Yes. So now you're not working, and now you have another project. You'll work with Abbeyfield.
I've worked with Abbeyfield. Again, that was Lewis Levy who had this Abbeyfield project. Lewis started what he called the Abbeyfield Jewish Society, as you know, which is based on the St. John's Wood Little Synagogue.
Mm.
And having got that going quite nicely with Peggy Langhouse, he was interested in Abbeyfield, as he was in many things, and decided that they needed something more than an ordinary supportive house. Because when you become too frail, the supportive house can't keep you.
No.
So he started this extra care thing in Kingsbury. And it is, of course, as all Abbeyfield is, non-denominational, with an emphasis on the Church of England side, naturally.
Although they do have these 2 Jewish homes, don't they?
The 2 Jewish homes, and we, in the one which I work, have 3 Jewish people out of 25. Yes, and I find it very interesting. We got this thing off the ground. I was involved before it was even built. And then Lewis said, would you like to sort of take part in the administration? Which, wanting something to do at that stage, I'm very pleased to take on. And then, to my joy, his cousin Sidney Levy joined me. Of course, Sidney is much my age and a very old friend. And we've been working it together ever since.
And am I right in saying that you have another honour with Abbeyfield?
No, not with Abbeyfield, no.
I thought that you were going to become... Is it the Jackson?
Jack's.
Tell us, I'm sorry, I got confused.
Jack's is slightly separate, although parallel. As you know, you tried to interest me in Jack's. That time I was about to go into hospital and wasn't at all well. And I was more or less drafted by Tony Sacker, who got on the telephone for half an hour one night and said, you will start a local Jack's group. So I agreed to do so, with pressure from Andrew too. Went to meet the Jack's lady, Annette Bellman, who impressed me enormously. She's a very capable lady, very nice. And we started Jack's group in Northwood. In when? We've been going
4 or 5 years ago now, wasn't it?
It's nearly 4 years, yes. 1984 we must have started, about March 84 by the time we had the initial meeting. I didn't know much about it, but I thought it sounded an awfully good idea. And it's very, very lucky, because they gave me a list of names. I managed to persuade David Driftle to come along. He was the only one I'd ever seen before of the initial committee. And they've turned out to be the most marvellous bunch.
That's really nice. I meet so many people who really enjoy it.
And, well, of course, starting on a good committee basis. None of us knew anything about it, of course. And it happens to be something that is needed and is very popular. We've been very lucky.
Am I right in saying that you always have men on your committee?
No, we have, as it happens, 8 men and 4 women.
I see. The reason I said that was when I originally heard about Jack's, it was said that they always wanted to have a male chairman in any event because it could get to the situation where you had too many women and so therefore the men didn't want to come. Now I think so many couples come, which is really very good.
Northwood is very unusual in that our membership is roughly 50-50 men and women, but many of the other groups are 60-70% women.
Yes. Well, that's a fact of life of it, isn't it? But that's really nice,
yes,
I think,
absolutely.
at Northwood.
Oh, marvellous.
So,
I mean, we started and we were lucky if we got 40 people on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Last week we had 105.
So what are you going to do now with Jack?
Well, I'm only allowed to do 3 years as chairman of
Yes.
Jack's. So I finish next week.
Yes.
And very fortunately they've asked me to become national treasurer of the Jack's movement, which is now 3,500 strong with 18 clubs and growing at the rate of 2 clubs a year roughly, which is the maximum we can cope with.
Are you going to do the work from your home or do you go to any office?
Well, that's an unfair question.
Oh.
At the moment Jack's don't have an office, but Annette Perlman's home is rapidly becoming more office than home, and her husband isn't terribly happy.
No.
You know,
So they're going to have to think something out, presumably.
Well, we're probably going to have
Yes.
to do something.
Yes.
But what?
Well, I do wish you luck in that new venture.
I shall need it, thank you.
Yes.
As you know, I'm not terribly knowledgeable on the sort of things that...
Well, from all the things that you said you started at not knowing anything, you seem to have made a success of them all.
Well, you learn as you go along.
That's right.
It's the only way you can do it.
That's right.
Oh, I have fun. I'm secretary of the road too, which is great fun.
Oh yes, I know you were saying about getting your road mended.
Yes, that's even more fun because it's something quite different.
So you certainly use your retirement time in a very Sorry, Dick, we had to stop there just for a minute. No, I was commenting on the fact of the useful way that you spend your retirement, and I think you must find life very fulfilled at the moment.
Well, yes, I don't think one wants to do as much my age as one did. You slow up a great deal, but there are things that everybody can do, in my opinion, and you haven't got to look very far to be usefully employed if you're retired. And in the main, shall I say, the late 60s and the 70s look after those who are in their 80s and 90s these days.
Well, that's a very nice note, I think, on which to finish.
Thank you very much.